Island, and we've still got this band of rain and drizzle moving into northern England, northern parts of Wales. But elsewhere, there should be plenty of bright sunshine. But as I say, a fairly chilly start in the south. Now, through the course of the morning, this band of rain and drizzle is going to be fairly slow moving, so in some places it's going to remain fairly damp through the day. Plenty of showers across Scotland, these banding together to bring some longer spells of rain at times. May see some hail and some thunder mixed in there too. But across the Midlands and the south, once again, another dry, fine, settled day, perhaps just a bit more cloud around compared to today. But feeling warm where you do catch the sunshine. And then into the evening, we'll eventually see that cloud, rain and drizzle ease away, and it's going to be turning cold once again across the north, but those showers are going to be easing away. And as we head into next week, high pressure's generally dominating for all, so lots of fine and settled weather too.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Sunday nights on GB News. From 6, Neil Oliver. At 7, it's Free Speech Nation with Andrew Doyle. At 9, Mark Dolan. And at 11, get set for the week ahead with headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Saturday night, and my friends, this is the Saturday 5. I'm Darren Grimes, along with Dr. Renee, Will Kingston, Eunice Sadigiani, and Matthew Stadlin. Tonight on the show,
more deplorable attacks
on the legacy of Winston Churchill.
Raped women who want a female counsellor are bigots.
Sir Keir Starmer, I tell you what, his approval ratings are dropping like a very heavy stone.
Yet more net zero
madness as Cumbria coal mine shuts down. The NHS desperately needs more money.
It's 6 p.m. and this is the Saturday 5. Welcome to the Saturday 5, my friends. Now, Sir Keir Starmer, he promised his government would tread more lightly on our lives. Well, if by lightly he means stomping on us like a rhino at a tea party, then mission accomplished. Honestly, I'm losing the will to live. But luckily, we've got Dr. Renee, our queen of common sense, to keep my blood pressure under control as we plough through the latest lunacy. And then Eunice will probably have me locked up faster than you can say Sir Keir Starlin for letting him spill the beans on his former religion on live telly. And next, I've got my escape plan sorted out tonight. A dinghy in Dover with Will Kingston, aka my Australian visa consultant, ready to smuggle me into the land of kangaroos. Will is the host of the brilliant Spectator podcast, Fire at Will. And finally, Matt Stadlin joins us. And I've told Dr. Renee to prepare the sedatives. He's so woke, I'm surprised he doesn't sleepwalk through life. But thank you, Matthew, for your company. Now, each of you know the drill. Each host outlines their argument about a chosen topic. Then we all pile in and the fur starts to fly. And of course, we want to know your views as well. Send your views and post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/yoursay. And don't forget, your questions need to come in for Ask the Five. No topics are off limits. Apart from asking for Eunice's number, it's happened before. But before we start tearing each other apart, it's his Saturday Night News with Tatiana Sanchez.
Darren, thank you very much. The top stories from the GB newsroom. A man allegedly sexually assaulted a woman on the same day he was released from prison under the government's early release scheme. It's understood he was released as part of the policy which aims to ease prison overcrowding on its first day on Tuesday. He allegedly reoffended in Kent and was later arrested at an address in South London. He appeared at a magistrate's court on Thursday charged with sexual assault, and he's due to appear at Crown Court next month. He has been recalled to prison. In other news, the Prime Minister met with the US President last night to discuss strategy and tactics regarding Ukraine and the Middle East. Meeting at the White House in Washington, D.C., the pair sat down for talks that Sir Keir Starmer described as long and productive. Speaking afterwards, the Prime Minister also said that he and Biden had reached a strong position regarding ending the conflict in Ukraine.
We've stood with Ukraine. Ukraine has a right to self-defence, and we've stood united, not just with our allies here in the US, but across with our NATO allies. That's very, very important to us. But today was about having the chance to talk not just about a particular step or tactic, but the strategy in relation to Ukraine. But also we cover the Middle East in some extensive detail, and other areas across the world. So it was a really important occasion for us to have this chance to discuss with our allies.
Meanwhile, more questions have been asked about the government's decision to cut winter fuel payments following a vote earlier this week. Figures released by the Department for Work and Pensions estimated almost 800,000 pensioners will miss out on the benefit under the new plans. Of those set to lose the support, around two-thirds have a disability and 83% are aged 80 or over. Downing Street says a full impact assessment of the change hasn't yet taken place. A rebellion could be brewing within the Labour Party following recent comments made by the Prime Minister around a ban on smoking outdoors at pubs. Labour MP for Newcastle upon Tyne East and Wallsend, Mary Glindon, has tabled a motion in Parliament against her own party in order to try and block the potential plans. In the motion, she praised the indoor smoking ban of 2007, but said existing ban outdoors could unduly restrict individual liberty. Today is the first day of the Lib Dem Party conference in Brighton, with the cost of living, defence and veterans, climate change and, crucially, their plan to fix the NHS, just some of the topics on the agenda. Earlier this afternoon, party leader Sir Ed Davey arrived at the conference on a jet ski. He's scheduled to speak at the event tomorrow, where a celebration's anticipated after his party won 72 seats in July's general election, their best ever result. Well, someone who's been speaking at the conference today is the deputy leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Wendy Chamberlain. Earlier, she told GB News about the need for parties to work together to tackle the broken NHS.
Without sorting social care, and we've been very clear that we are keen to work on a cross-party basis to solve it, because no matter what party is in power, social care as an issue is not going away. But if you don't sort social care, you're not going to fundamentally sort the problems within the NHS. Keir Starmer has said that fixing the NHS is a 10-year job. He won't be able to do that unless he keeps other parties on side so that we can all do that work together.
And the funeral of Olympic athlete Rebecca Cheptegei took place in her home country of Uganda this morning. The runner died earlier this month after she was doused with petrol and set alight by a former boyfriend. She'd recently returned from competing in the Paris Olympics when the attack took place. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, Sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers, Tatiana. It's Saturday night and you're with the Saturday 5. I'm Darren Grimes and I can promise that you're in for a very lively show. Let's crack on with tonight's first debate. I'm going to abuse position of the chair and kick off right now. We'll kick off in more ways than one, to be honest. According to the pollster Ipsos, Sir Keir Starmer's unfavourability rating has surged by 8 points to 46%. That matches its high after Labour's humiliating loss in the 2021 Hartlepool by-election. I remember it well. And this government, well, they're busy cutting winter fuel payments for 780,000 pensioners, leaving a shocking number of disabled and elderly Brits out in the cold. That isn't my words, they're from the Department for Work and Pensions. But don't worry, they've decided against doing a full impact assessment, despite doing one in 2017, when it was rumoured that the Tories were doing exactly the same as they're doing now. Meanwhile, their bright idea for fixing overcrowded prisons has backfired spectacularly, with a man released already back inside for allegedly sexually assaulting someone. You couldn't make it all up. But hey, at least smoking and unhealthy food are next on the chopping block, eh? Priorities. They're your priorities, aren't they? That's what you at home care about. Banning smoking areas and unhealthy food on telly adverts. What more could Britain possibly need? I'm at the end of my tether, Renee. I need... what have you got, sedatives-wise? Come on.
I think sedatives is going to be the only answer. I think we're in for a very long, hard 4 years and 9 months, however long it is.
Are you surprised at those numbers?
I'm surprised that it's happened so quickly. I mean, look, when Blair came to power, there really wasn't enthusiasm for him, and he floated along on that enthusiasm for quite a long time. But Starmer has just come in and sunk, as you rightly say, like a stone. I'm surprised it's happened so quickly.
Will, I mean, you've been keeping an eye out on everything that's been going on in Britain. Now, do you actually observe this as a bad government already?
I think it's worse than a bad government. I think it's a dangerous government.
Wow.
You know, there is only one thing worse than an authoritarian, and it's a boring authoritarian. You know, at least some authoritarians in the past have a bit of bravado about them. It's the combination of this authoritarian instinct mixed with the joyless, sad, grim negativity, which I don't think you need from a leader in a time where you need to see a positive spirit to get us out of some of the mess that we're in.
So you think he's authoritarian, Will, but at the same time, presumably, you'll be criticising him for letting prisoners out early? Well, which is it?
He did it the wrong way. He should have just got the 10,000 odd prisoners who are from other countries and booted them out. There are more sensible ways to go about doing this.
You can't just boot them out. We might all want foreign criminals to be deported if they came here as adults. That's one thing. But because there are agreements in place with other countries, and those need to be negotiated, because guess what? We live in a globalised world where we have responsibilities to other countries.
So what agreement do we have in place with the Taliban? So if an Afghan commits a crime, you're saying we can't just deport them and put them there?
Well, if we were to deport someone back to Afghanistan, then they might be tortured or killed by the Taliban.
That's not our problem.
Well, it's my problem. I'm a British citizen, and I don't want to be deporting people, even if they've committed crimes. I don't want to be deporting them back to countries where they might get executed or tortured.
If they tortured and raped a child, you still would care about how they were treated when they went home?
I'd have them in prison for the longest possible time under our legal system.
I'll give you a real-world example. There was a guy that came here from Afghanistan, was given 29 years for killing Tom Roberts, who was an aspiring Royal Marine, and he had been caught with a machete 2 days before, and the police just shrugged their shoulders and didn't do anything, evidently. Now, the fact of the matter is, I don't want, as a taxpayer, to have to fund him at His Majesty's pleasure for the next 29 years. I actually think I don't give a damn what happens to him in Afghanistan. If you've murdered a British citizen, why the hell should you expect any so-called human rights and liberal values when you commit such an awful crime?
Because we're still a civilised country. For example, we don't have the death penalty in this country, unlike, say, unlike a country, say, like Iran, we don't stone people. Unlike a country like, say, Saudi Arabia, we don't chop people's heads off. And that's a country, like that's a country I want to be in. Doesn't mean that I don't revile the crime that you've been talking about with every inch of my body, just as you do.
Eunice, you're from Iran. Do you see it? Do you see the comparison Matthew is making between if we were to be more robust with foreign offenders and what Iran does to its own criminals?
Yeah, well, I think we need to leave the ECHR because I feel like we have too many laws and regulations that stop us from deporting illegals or even having illegals in this country. And once they arrive at this country and they commit a crime and they go to prison, it's almost impossible for us to deport them because of the laws that we have. And I think these laws are the ones that need to change.
It's really interesting, though, isn't it, that I understand what you mean. Of course, we're all humane and we don't want anyone to suffer. I don't want anyone to suffer in the world. But once they commit a hideous crime and they're in our prison service, I really don't care if we send them back to Afghanistan or wherever they're going to go. I don't care if we send them back to America and they face the death penalty, because that's the law in America.
That's, I guess, one of the differences between you and I.
I think there are lots.
Yeah, I mean, Eunice, do you actually think that we ought to, I mean, the fact of the matter is, right, that we'll have a lot of people, I agree with you on the ECHR, but the political will of politicians isn't there to do this either, otherwise we would have done it. Germany, for example, is ignoring the ECHR currently. So, you know, the likes of Hungary, the likes of Austria saying they agree with what Hungary are doing, busing illegal migrants to Brussels, potentially. So there are a whole host of examples throughout Europe, but we're not following them. Do you think this is a bit of a weak nation?
It is a weak nation, and we are seen as a soft target because people immigrate here from all kinds of extreme ideological backgrounds, from Afghanistan, from Syria, from even Iran, some people, you know, Eastern Africa. And they come here and they see us as a soft target. So they come here, they take advantage of our welfare system, they take advantage of our NHS, they commit crimes, and they are caught with a machete. The police doesn't do anything. So I feel like we need to be a lot more...
So who commits crimes? You're saying all illegal migrants or all asylum seekers commit crimes, or some?
I didn't say that. I said that the fact that we are very soft, we need to be a lot more robust. In our immigration policy.
How are we not soft?
Because we have laws in place, and because we are a country with borders. And if you talk to the men and women who are trying to keep us safe in this country, they will tell you they are doing their absolute best. The fact that we can't simply pick up people, vulnerable people, many of them, I would say all of them by definition if you're crossing the Channel, and then simply march them back to France because we have, again, a legal relationship with France that would prevent us from doing that, doesn't mean we're a soft touch. It means we abide by international law. We're not a soft touch at all. We are a strong country and we're a great country.
Surprisingly, I will agree with Matthew in that we are not a weak country, but this is a weak government, and that's something which people need to keep in mind.
But the last one didn't do anything about it.
And that was a weak government as well. We've had 20 years of bad government in this country. Now, there is a broader point, and you started here, Darren, by saying, is this a government in free fall? And the fact of the matter is, there is now several instances where they've got the optics of politics terribly wrong. When you saw prisoners being let out and suddenly being splashed with champagne as pensioners are being kicked. There's very obvious early signs that they struggle with the optics of politics as well as the execution of very basic political issues.
Where would you put those prisoners? Up in hotels?
Well, no, I wouldn't let them out, and then I'd change who we are choosing to let out, as we've just been talking about.
But they were trying not to let out...
A seriously posited idea by the Labour Party that they'll put those who have left prison in hotels.
I think I'd like
do home detention.
Yeah, and also, I mean, there are lots of other solutions. Last week in Kent, a man who has been caught for not the first time having child sex abuse images on his computer was let free by the judge because his counsel argued that he'd had a relapse because he was very stressed, but he had a job now, and if he went to prison he'd lose his home and his job. Now, I would say that instead of putting people in prison who have committed fraud, who have committed the crime of sending hurty tweets or whatever else it is, let's deal with them, let's punish them.
What do you mean by a hurty tweet? Do you mean, say, let's burn down asylum hotels? Would you classify that as a hurty tweet?
No, I just think we got our priorities in the wrong place. So we go after people on Twitter that had a freedom of speech, but then we don't deal with illegals and we don't deal with crime, and we are seen as...
Do you understand that speech is regulated in this country?
Yeah, it is, but you are still allowed to have an opinion based on facts, and I feel like what Keir Starmer is doing, emptying prisons, letting dangerous criminals out and arresting people that say something on Twitter is unacceptable.
Do you feel unable to express your opinion freely on this show?
No,
Okay, so we've got free speech.
We don't.
That's a speech side. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's obviously in a unique position. Anyway, Matthew, I believe it's your turn.
Would you like me to address the camera?
Yes,
right.
please.
So my view is, I don't know whether you saw this week this shocking but not surprising report that the NHS is in a crisis. I mean, it is in itself arguably on life support. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, someone who I wanted to become Prime Minister, says there should be no more money without reforms. I think that's fantasy politics. I'll give you a very good example. My wife gave birth almost 2 years ago in the hospital around the corner, St Mary's Hospital, and the hospital's literally crumbling. The walls were crumbling. It was a shocking experience. There was a huge amount of kindness and a lot of skill from the professionals involved. However, the fabric of the building was literally crumbling. That, for me, is unacceptable in a country that I've already described as great. And yes, there, of course, are enormous reforms that I've no doubt need to be made. There may well be efficiencies that can be made. But if you think that you can reform a crumbling hospital rather than actually invest in a hospital, as the Conservatives should have done, having had 14 years in power, then I'm afraid you and I disagree.
Well, Renee, you're a doctor.
I mean, there are so many places I could start on this, Matthew. So, firstly, the problem that most hospitals have now is the ones that have been reformed, like, let's say, for example, the Royal London where I trained, or UCH, they have such large PFI mortgages which were instigated by Major but then accelerated by Brown and Blair to a degree, where they can't spend their money on anything else but the massive mortgage that they have and the contracts for their printers and everything else that came with it. The NHS is broken, you're right. And
that's Labour policy, isn't it now? It's official Labour policy that the NHS is broken.
They still won't fix it. But the NHS is broken. I don't think it's broken beyond repair. I think it is repairable, and I think it is repairable to be free at the point of use. But in order to do that, we have to do several things. We have to have an honest conversation with the public about what it is they want to treat. The NHS is spreading itself so far and wide now across things that are not medical conditions, but they're lifestyle things that people would really like.
Such as?
IVF. Yeah, IVF. Trans medication for children that they don't need, they just need counselling. There's lots. Varicose veins that are unsightly, but they're not going to kill anyone. I could go on and on. So we need to have an honest conversation. We need to say, this is the pot of money. This is what we do currently treat. What would you like to treat? And I would put cancer, the elderly, children, long-term conditions at the top of that list.
It's a very difficult argument to make to people who have relied on IVF.
But this is the problem.
That's an extraordinarily difficult thing to go through as a family.
It is, I know.
But
I do know.
So, do you know, Renee has a point, but so is the fact of the matter is, if you are more likely to die in this country in accident and emergency because you're stuck on a trolley than you would be were you in a nation that spends less on its healthcare provisions, then surely we've got a significant problem. And
I think everyone on this panel would agree that we've got more than a significant problem. We've got a very significant problem. We've no doubt all of us had negative experiences.
Where is your evidence that more money is what will solve?
I've given you evidence very succinctly, which Renee, yes, it did. It did. It said
a solution.
What it said was that buildings and technology were neglected because of Tory austerity in the 2010s. And let me ask you this question. How do you fix a crumbling building without money?
Well, Tories increased.
But what you do is we've got more money in the NHS than we ever had. We're now up there with the top 5 GDP spends on the NHS. We've got 20% more doctors than we had before the pandemic, and nurses. But what you need to do is use the money in the NHS properly. And I can tell you, because I work in it every single day, Matthew, the money that is wasted is hemorrhaging from the NHS. Shall I give you some examples?
Yes, please. Just to be clear, you are an NHS doctor,
I am an NHS
not a private doctor.
I don't do private doctoring. OK, so we've divided everything up, every speciality, into hundreds of little silos. So psychiatry, that used to be one thing, is now lots of different things. The crisis team, the the 6-week intervention team, the 6-month team, the long-term team. Every one of those teams has its own building, has its own back office, its own secretarial staff, its own contracts for its printers. We're duplicating effort just about everywhere when it's all be better to be one. In the hospital I trained at, the Royal London, when I went to a cardiac arrest call and took a blood sample from someone's wrist, I'd run to a machine that didn't fit the syringe I had because that contract was the machine on the next floor.
But you appreciate there is a difference between day-to-day expenditure and capital expenditure. And we clearly need more capital expenditure, otherwise our hospitals will continue to crumble.
Coming to the end of this discussion, Will, have you any thoughts on that?
Well,
diversity and inclusion officers, are they necessary?
Oh, come on. You had to slip that in. You had to slip that in.
The end of the world.
One thing I would slightly disagree with Renee is I don't understand why a copay can't be part of this solution. Even a small copay, which acts as a disincentive to go to the hospital.
What is a copay?
Put $5 before you go to the doctor or you go to the hospital, and it just disincentivises people from going to get really small, minor things treated that aren't life-threatening or close to being life-threatening.
It does, but the problem is really sick, vulnerable people just won't come. And actually, I believe that if you reformed the whole NHS and decided what you were going to treat and got your priorities right, you'd free up enough money to fix the hospital.
Well said on that first point. Very well said on that first point, if I may say. The rebuttal of what Will was saying.
I'm glad to bring you both together.
All right. We'll end that one there. Thank you very much, Matthew. Now, coming up next on the show, is this yet more sign of net zero madness actually, well, devouring the British economy? The High Court have blocked plans to build the UK's first deep coal mine in more than 30 years, following campaigning from 2 environmental groups. This and much more on the way with the Saturday 5, live on GB News.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
When I knew that I was doing this segment this week, I feel like this week was a real homework task for me because I'll be honest, I haven't been around Scottish food much in my life, but I obviously know all the obvious. And I thought I'd bring in a selection of some of, I guess, the sort of the quintessential culinary delights of the North. I mean, we have in front of us haggis.
I think we should begin with some haggis.
So, Michael, I've never eaten haggis before. This is going to be the first time.
Well, have you eaten anything like haggis before? Have you eaten anything that is made from the intestines of an animal?
I mean, I've had things like chopped liver and, you know, a bit of offal here and there.
Well, there we are. I mean, I got a great surprise. I was holding a great... When I was in government, I was holding a great party in Scotland, and I had a lot of Spanish visitors, and I was offering them haggis, and I thought that they would be astonished by haggis and maybe repelled. But when they ate it, they said, oh, no, this is morcilla. So, you know, there is an equivalent in Spain.
Absolutely.
So if I recall, and you've probably been mugging it up, which I have not, but haggis is made within the stomach of a sheep.
Yes.
And you take the heart and the lungs and some other part of the sheep and you mash it up.
With onions, oatmeal, suet.
Yes.
And it's stuffed into the sheep's stomach. But a lot of the haggis you get these days, especially sort of the slightly cheaper varieties in supermarkets, it's usually an artificial casing.
Oh.
You know what? This is actually quite nice.
I think it's absolutely heavenly. And
It's very savoury.
To me, it's two things. Yes, to me, it's two things. It's both the taste and the texture. You quite rightly refer to the oatmeal going in there. So it's got this crunchy, granular sort of texture. Marvellous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way.
Might be cold in this studio.
That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Saturday Five. As always, thank you for your messages about tonight's topics. Whew, boy, oh boy, you're all tetchy tonight. Dylan says, stop giving billions to other countries and build new hospitals, among other things, instead. And Dylan, we're sending £12 billion in climate aid abroad. Barbara says Tory austerity was caused by Labour before 2010. And it wasn't even proper austerity, unless you were a spoiled person growing up. Matthew, proper austerity, was it?
It was very painful austerity for the poorer people in this country, who some of whom, it's argued, lost their lives as a consequence of it because of the failings of public services.
And because we deify the NHS. My cousin, Catherine says, my cousin works in the NHS. She knows how much gets wasted just from an admin and supervision point of view. Yeah, so lots of views there. Thank you very much for sending them in. Right, which reprobate is going next?
Yeah.
Oh.
So more...
Take it away.
So more net zero madness as the Cumbria coal mine shuts down. And we all know that long-term this will only put a strain on the consumer. Because what we are doing is we are exporting our energy sources to countries like China, India and Saudi Arabia. So they stand to make all the money. And it's ironic for me that because we all live on the same planet, so exporting CO2 emissions doesn't actually help the environment. I'll give you another example. We ban plastic straws and we move to paper straws. Well, paper straws are made out of trees and they don't really work. So I don't really understand this net zero policy because it's not doing us any favors. We are losing money and we're at the same time putting more strain on the consumer. So Darren.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say to anyone who is on the green side of the argument, right, and saying, oh, my goodness, we can't possibly build a new coal mine, the first in, 30 years. But the fact of the matter is, you need coal to build steel, for cement, for Heritage Railway. There are so many ways in which we still need coal, not for the whole energy supply as it used to be, of course, but we still need it in limited scenarios. Well, limited, cement's not all that limited,
well,
right?
Steel's fairly important as well.
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is that if you want to build those great big whopping wind farms, well, guess what? You need steel, you need cement. Why not get the coal that you need for that here in Britain instead of importing it from, dare I say, Australia or Russia, even worse?
Well,
worse. Well, I don't know. Australia's gone a bit...
It's going in that direction.
This particular coal mine was actually going to be the greenest coal mine on Earth anywhere. It was going to be closed. It wasn't open casting. So it was going to be safe and it was going to be providing what we're going to use anyway. So we are now going to ship it in from all of these far countries. There's a massive and bigger cost to that. We are not going to see in 30 years' time that we don't need coal. We are going to need coal. All of those other countries that Eunice mentioned are rubbing their hands together in glee. Saudi Arabia is now making steel because we aren't. And with that, we're losing our jobs and our communities.
The fact of the matter is, and the reason this is so annoying, this whole debate, is that it is symbolism. This coal mine, as with every other net zero initiative, will not make 1 ounce of difference to global emissions in the greater scheme of things.
Yes.
And therefore I do not understand, and Matthew, I dare say you may be the one to argue against me here. I've never heard a rationale for why you would...
symbolism. Come in, I can speak up.
Why would you put symbolism? Why would you put symbolism ahead of everyday British people? I do not understand.
Well, just 1 or 2 quick thoughts on this. It is obviously true that to the extent that we might be, as it were, exporting or importing our net zero, so if we are importing goods here because we no longer make them here because we want to get to net zero by 2050, then that's not great. And there should be no deception in any of this. It all needs to be transparent, and I'm sure it is. I was trying to look up some of the stats before we came on air. But the wider picture here is that if climate change continues in the way that it is, we all suffer. It might take longer for us in this country to suffer than it would, say, as you say, in Bangladesh, which is very low-lying and is at risk of going underwater, parts of it. But in the end, it is in all of our interests. And you talk about symbolism, Will. I accept that symbolism doesn't get you anywhere if it's empty. But in order to show global leadership, and I want Britain to be a global leader...
Do you think China is going to follow us, do you?
We have to hope so, but what we certainly can't do is we certainly can't get round the table with countries like China and impress upon them the importance of getting to net zero if we aren't doing our own bit.
I mean, this is what you say about human rights as well. Oh, the UK's got to allow these criminals to come in.
No, it's not. It's a very different argument.
And kill people in Britain, and then we can't get rid of them because we don't want Russia to think we're mean and nasty.
No, that's not what I said. That's not what I said.
This is the only argument I've ever heard, which is we need to be a global leader. And the one thing that has been proven over the last 5 years is that China couldn't care less what the West thinks.
So we don't just put our head in the sand on this, because climate change is real and it represents a risk to all of us. No, not so says me. So says the overwhelming consensus of science on our planet says that climate change is not just real, but it is also happening.
Let's let Eunice come back. You said, on that point, on 2 points Matthew has made, Labour needs to be transparent on this. Are they being transparent on it? I don't think they are. No. And secondly, we're 1% of global CO2 emissions. Why are we killing ourselves in the name of this climate cult?
I just think it's virtue signalling, because even the Paris Climate Agreement, countries like America, UK, Europe had to, comply with the regulations. But then countries like China, India, Russia, Saudi Arabia didn't have to. So they stood to grow their economy exponentially whilst we are going downhill. And I just don't think, look, when I came out of university, I believed in this whole environmental hoax. But the more I study it, the more I realize that it's actually nonsense.
Like René, you don't believe in climate change?
Because, look...
You don't believe in man-made climate change?
I don't believe the fact that we have so much influence over it, because thousands of years ago, the global temperatures were 2 degrees higher. There was 2 ice ages. To think that humans emit so much CO2. And as Darren said, we're only 1% of global emissions. What are you going to do about China? What are you going to do about India?
There are 2 different arguments. It's really important. There are 2 different arguments, right? One is, can we have an impact? And of course, we are only about 1%. The question is whether we can lead the world or influence the world if we don't do our bit. And I would argue we have to do our bit. But on your other point, you should read the overwhelming scientific consensus, which says that climate change is real. You can sit here with no expertise and tell the viewers that it doesn't exist. No, I'm sorry. Well, this is an important point, because I'm 1 against 4 here. No, I'm 1 against 4 here. No, I haven't made my point clearly enough.
There's a body of work there. We should all...
An overwhelming global consensus that means that Eunice's view, with all due respect to Eunice, means nothing.
You have made that point, Matthew. All right, we've got a question from Cassandra. Cassandra says, transporting coal from another country is more CO2 intensive due to the use of CO2 in transportation. The same amount of coal would be used whether it mined locally or transported. So how does the refusal to open a new coal mine in Britain reduce CO2?
Exactly.
Matthew.
As I've already said, we as a world face a crisis. We as a country are part of that crisis. We've got to do our bit. I have also said that it isn't good enough simply to cut back on our own, as it were, natively created emissions and then export or import some of them. It has to be joined up and it has to be transparent.
So you would say to Ed Miliband, this is the wrong thing?
No, I would not say that to Ed Miliband. I think it's probably the right thing to do, because I think the signal and the symbol, to use Will's word, of the UK, which is committed to net zero, the symbol of us opening a new coal power plant, is negative.
I can even if I was to accept that argument, this is about prioritisation. So if you prioritise the possibility that we may be a leader in climate solutions, whatever that means, compared with the very real and urgent impact that this has on everyday British people who are already struggling to pay bills. This isn't necessarily about whether either argument is right. This is about prioritisation, and we need to prioritise people who are struggling today.
What is that impact? Just spell out that impact.
Higher energy bills. 3 words.
So look, Al Gore tweeted many years ago, said in a documentary he made, that by 2013 all the ice caps will be melted. Greta Thunberg said 5 years ago, in 2018, that, oh, in 5 years' time, the world will end if we don't do anything about the climate. So we had prediction of the prediction of the prediction that says, oh, the world is collapsing and none of them...
Greta Thunberg said that the world would end in 5 years' time.
Yeah, back in 2018, and she actually did it. Yeah, exactly.
I'm not here to defend Greta Thunberg, but she's certainly not a scientist.
No, but his point is, though, that this alarmism...
No, but I follow the science.
It is an alarmism, and look, what you are doing, you are sacrificing everyday people. Everyday people have to pay a much higher fee for energy, and on a, premise that, oh, the world will end soon, so we all have to pay higher costs.
I never said the world will end soon. I said we're facing critical climate change and that we have to do something about it.
If there's critical climate change, surely the world would, therefore, we would all drown.
No, it depends what you mean by the word critical. If you brought up Bangladesh, to give a very straightforward example, since you teed it up, if Bangladesh goes underwater because of climate change, it's low-lying and sea levels go up, where do you think those people are going to want to live? In London,
this is the other thing. We're so selective with the science that we end up choosing. If we increase temperatures globally, then you have less cold deaths in the UK, and there are more cold deaths by a factor of 10
to 1
than heated.
We need fossil fuels.
That's a completely acceptable argument. We just choose not to pick that one because it doesn't suit the narrative.
Yeah, indeed. Right, coming up next, we'll be discussing how the trans chief executive of a sexual assault support service has had to stand down after a review found it failed to protect women-only spaces. Honestly, this story is horrific. You're with the Saturday 5, live on GB News.
Hello, good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, we've got a bit of a mix in the weather for this weekend. Sunny spells, blustery showers, also some cloud and some outbreaks of rain, but lots of fine weather around too. And the reason for this mix is that we've got high pressure to the south giving us those fine conditions, but we've also got a weather front that's slowly sinking its way southeastwards across the country, bringing us that cloud and rain. Now, as we head into this evening, that cloud and rain will slowly move its way into northern areas. And behind it, we've got plenty of blustery showers moving their way into western parts of Scotland. But to the far south, that's where it's going to be clear and dry and feeling quite chilly as soon as the sun goes down tonight. May even see a little bit of grass frost in rural spots down to the south. So to start Sunday then, as I say, plenty of showers moving their way into western and northern parts of Scotland, across Northern Ireland and just into the Scottish borders. A fairly cloudy start that will break up as we head through the day. Cloud and outbreaks of rain and drizzle, which could be a touch heavy over hills across northern areas of England and Wales. But as I say, across the south after a chilly night, that is going to make it feel cold on Sunday to begin with. Through the day, though, things are going to warm up. Where we have this band of cloud, rain and drizzle, that may just linger on for a time, so quite a damp day for some northern areas of England and Wales. Sunny spells and blustery showers through into Scotland. Some of these could be heavy with some hail and thunder. But once again, down to the south and southeast, that's where they'll hold on to the warmer weather and largely dry as well. Now, for the start of the new week, we'll start to see high pressure taking hold, which means for most of the country, largely fine and dry conditions, plenty of sunny spells around. You might just see a build of high cloud in the northwest with a weather front down out into the Atlantic. And that high pressure does hold on, which means plenty of fine and settled weather for the beginning of next week.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back to the Saturday 5. It's time for our next debate. Who's
It's
going?
me.
Oh, here we are. Hold your horses.
OK, so this week we've seen that misogyny really is showing its head again amongst the trans lobby at the heart of our institutions that really shouldn't have this debate. So the Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre's CEO had to stand down this week after it was proven that there was an agenda within that organisation to almost re-educate women who wanted to know the sex of the counsellor who would be assigned to them just after they'd been raped, the most horrific thing a woman could ever go through. This went to court when an ex-employee who showed gender-critical views decided to question whether or not women should have the right to know the sex of the person speaking to them. It was headed up by somebody called Midral Wadhwa, who actually said that everybody could get raped, but when women showed bigoted views by asking for a female-only counsellor, they would certainly treat them, but they would also challenge those views. This just shows that women's spaces now are not safe, even when they are at their most traumatised in life.
I was shocked when I read this.
I wasn't shocked, sadly, because I know the effect and the infiltration that this lobby has had, and I know how vile these men who want to be in women's spaces are. I really are. Matthew, what do you think?
I think that in a rape crisis centre, the overwhelming priority, focus should be those who have been raped. I mean, I suspect that everyone watching this programme would agree with that. I think this is a very delicate and very sensitive conversation for obvious reasons. What I wouldn't do is try to cast trans people generally as desperate to get into women's spaces.
I said the trans lobby.
But you also said desperate to get into into women's spaces, and I would be almost certain that there are a lot of very, very good trans people who work across healthcare who only want to do good. This case sounds shocking, and as I say, in women's spaces, the priority has to be women, and even more so in a space where you're helping people who have been raped.
Well, I think everyone would agree with that, but the question is, Matthew, do you think men ought to be in there?
I'm not sure that's a particularly easy question for me to answer. I mean, when you say men, that's obviously highly offensive to trans women. I think if you ask women, you'll get a very significant range of views on that. But I'm entitled to a view because I think we all are. But I think the best place to answer that question is women.
Will, one of our viewers says, Clive, good evening, Clive. He says men should never be anywhere near women who have been abused. It's a disgrace that men are there. I mean, you're a lily-livered liberal. Do you not think, live and let live, of course these men should be allowed to run rampant? I'm absolutely disgusted by it, to be perfectly honest. And I blame the SNP, actually, in a large part as well. They pandered and aided and abetted much of this, and they let women down.
I can't believe we're having this conversation. I just cannot believe it. And it goes to show how just sensible, common sense things. Like you said, this is a difficult question, Matthew. It's a very simple question.
Yeah.
There are women who are uncomfortable with men in a rape centre after they've just been raped. You do not put men in a women's rape centre.
Well, why are you calling them men?
Because they are biological men.
Yeah, but these are people who. I think you're using this as and as I said, it's a very sensitive issue. I didn't necessarily. It's a particularly difficult question. I said that women, victims, should be absolute focus in this particular scenario. But I worry that you are using this story, which is a shocking story, as a bat with which to hit trans women.
They are mutually exclusive. You cannot have the feelings of trans people, men or women, and the feelings of women in this instance, and have them both accommodate.
So what you can do...
make a choice, and the choice has to be with women.
I really have to come back to that point, because you're saying people are using this as a tool with which to beat people. They said that after Rotherham. They said that after girls were systemically raped, that actually it was being used as a tool with which to beat certain communities. Now you're telling telling women who have been raped and they have been put in a rape centre with men that they're potentially using this as an excuse to beat trans people.
You're entirely misrepresenting
That's
what I've said. No, you're the host of this programme.
Yes, I am.
So
indeed.
allow me to have my response, and please don't mischaracterise or misrepresent what I said 2.5 minutes ago or 25 seconds ago. Well, I'll say it again, right?
Well, no, let's not.
Women are the priority in this scenario. Okay, overwhelmingly. What I'm saying is, don't call trans women men, because it's highly offensive.
Let's call them trans-identifying males, because that's what they are.
They're trans women, that's what they are.
No, they're trans-identifying males.
Doesn't mean I think they should be in a rape centre. As I've made clear, women and the victims should be at the very heart of this. But let's not use this case as a stick with which to beat trans women.
At the core of this is that we cannot have trans rights trumps women's rights.
I haven't said that they should. I've just said be respectful.
Righto, folks, still to come tonight, and this promises to grind your gears. Claims from a podcaster named Daryl Murray that Winston Churchill was the chief villain of World War II. Can you believe it? You heard that right. Find out more after this. You're with the Saturday 5 live on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Good morning, everybody. I honestly think Gen Z are as lazy as we've been made out. I was on GB News a couple of months ago talking about a report which suggested that they were very lazy, very work shy, and I honestly don't think that's the case. I respect my elders, so I'm certainly not going to sit here and blame them for the slow return to many offices across the country. But I am actually 20. I've run businesses since I was 15 and 16, since I dropped out of school, and I have always been pro-office, right? So I fit right into that Generation Z category, and I think the office environment is fantastic, not just professionally but socially for young people, especially kind of after COVID, and it halted a lot of their social plans or people going to university, etc. I think getting people into the office, being surrounded by the more senior people, the people with more experience, which is what we're talking about, older people, is actually incredibly positive. But I think Generation Z get a lot of stick in the media, and I'm often sat here debating this about them being called lazy. I guess I think probably what's different is technology is advanced, so people's jobs are a lot quicker, and Generation Z have obviously grew up with that technology, therefore in a position to do jobs quicker. And I guess that's kind of where that kind of narrative has come from, because Gen Z do really kind of go with the whole work smarter, not harder kind of mentality, which is often met with a little bit of stick.
I'm not knocking the young generation at all. I mean, I'm just saying it's by experience. Undoubtedly, they're not as hard-working as the more experienced worker, but I'm certainly not knocking them on that basis. If they had the opportunity, I'm sure there'd be more and more would want to get into the workplace. But unfortunately, I think this COVID has changed the world, and it's made younger people more lazy than older people. Older people just can't wait to, well, shouldn't say that, can't wait to get out of the house to get to work.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss my big opinion. Mark Meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Saturday 5. Thank you very much for your company. Now, by process of elimination, because I'm a deeply intelligent person, there's only one person left, so it can only be Will Kingston. Take it away, Will.
Strong powers of intuition, Darren. Ladies and gentlemen, we are used to the left trying to tear down Western civilization bit by bit. Sadly, that instinct is now prevalent on the right. This was on full display in an interview between Tucker Carlson and Daryl Cooper recently. I believe we've got a clip. Let's see that.
That I thought Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War. Now, he didn't kill the most people. He didn't commit the most atrocities. But I believe, and I think when you really get into it and tell the story right and don't leave anything out, you see that he was primarily responsible for that war becoming what it did, becoming something other than an invasion of Poland.
In addition to that, in addition to saying he was the chief villain of World War II, he said he was a warmonger. He said he elongated the war unnecessarily. He said he was a psychopath. This is all nonsense, of course, but it is popular nonsense. Millions and millions of people agreed with him online, including many on the right. And this is the problem. Too many people on the right in the UK, in America, in Australia have fallen out of love with their country. They are not patriotic anymore. Identity politics, the rise of the woke march through institutions has fried their brains. Sensible, everyday British people need to defend a positive vision of their history, and that starts with defending their greatest hero, who is, of course, Winston Churchill.
Yes.
Anyone dare disagree?
I'm always sceptical when people start saying that we need to think something. I don't like being told what to think. But on Churchill, the clip you've shown is utterly absurd. I personally find it quite offensive. I mean, I don't have a right not to be offended. My grandparents on my father's side, Hitler tried to murder because they were Jews in Vienna. My grandfather on my mother's side got the Military Cross for bravery for fighting Hitler's forces. The idea that Hitler, who tried and did kill 6 million Jews and brought death across Europe, and not just across Europe, but across the world, the idea that somehow Churchill was the chief propagator of death in the Second World War is just a disgraceful thing to say. He's entitled to say it, but it's a disgraceful thing to say. And you talk about the right. I think it's very interesting you talk about the right. I mean, I don't know what this man, I don't know who he is, I don't know what his politics are, but it is true that on the right in politics in America, and perhaps to an extent here, there are people who are sympathetic to Putin and to what he's done in Ukraine, and it goes hand in hand with conspiracy theories.
I can't think of a single person on the right in this country who was on the side of President Putin.
Well, let's hope that's true, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, you just said it is, so who is it? There aren't anyone.
Well, I don't know. I mean, certainly the Tory party, the sort of traditional... Hang on. The traditional Tory party in this country do stand up to Putin, and I commend them for that.
Look, the great tragedy of all of this is that the woke left has created a woke right who are similarly keen on breaking down our history, who similarly believe in the concept of identity, but it's not the concept of identity through racial groups, it's the concept of identity through, say, I'm a Tucker Carlson supporter, so I have to believe everything he says. Or
well said on that. No, I don't think it's the fault of the so-called woke left, but I think it's the fault of social media, conspiracy theories, and I think Tucker Carlson is a dangerous force.
Yeah. Don't have very long, sorry.
I just think I think you're absolutely right. I think we're just trying to chip away anything that might be good about our history. Churchill is a brilliant man. I'm sure he was also a very flawed man. And I'm all for teaching our children about the good and the bad in everyone. Yes, so that they see things in reality, not how we want them.
Because it's dangerous to create heroes. Churchill can have helped us win the war, but he was also a bigot and a racist. Those two things can go hand in hand.
Creating heroes is essential. We need to cherish our heroes. If you can't say Winston Churchill is a hero, then no one is a hero.
He was a hero in the context of the Second World War. He absolutely was.
Yeah. I think every historical character is flawed, and Churchill was flawed, OK? But it took someone like Churchill to go against Hitler and defeat him, OK? And that's what it is.
Yeah, I agree. All right, loads more to come tonight on the show, including the big interview where we'll discuss whether Labour is hiding the immense costs of mass migration. Well, that's going to be a corker. and then we'll get into the Ask Us Anything, so do get your questions in for that. But don't go anywhere, we'll be back after this very short break.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, we've got a bit of a mix in the weather for this weekend. Sunny spells, blustery showers, also some cloud and some outbreaks of rain, but lots of fine weather around too. And the reason for this mix is that we've got high pressure to the south giving us those fine conditions, but we've also got a weather front that's slowly sinking its way southeastwards across the country, bringing us that cloud and rain. Now, as we head into this evening, that cloud and rain will slowly move its way into northern areas. And behind it, we've got plenty of blustery showers moving their way into western parts of Scotland. But to the far south, that's where it's going to be clear and dry and feeling quite chilly as soon as the sun goes down tonight. May even see a little bit of grass frost in rural spots down to the south. So to start Sunday then, as I say, plenty of showers moving their way into western and northern parts of Scotland. Across Northern Ireland and just into the Scottish borders, a fairly cloudy start that will break up as we head through the day. Cloud and outbreaks of rain and drizzle, which could be a touch heavy over hills across northern areas of England and Wales. But as I say, across the south after a chilly night, that is going to make it feel cold on Sunday to begin with. Through the day, though, things are going to warm up. Where we have this band of cloud, rain and drizzle, that may just linger on for a time, so quite a damp day for some northern areas of England and Wales. Sunny spells and blustery showers through into Scotland. Some of these could be heavy with some hail and thunder. But once again, down to the south and southeast, that's where they'll hold on to the warmer weather and largely dry as well. Now, for the start of the new week, we'll start to see high pressure taking hold, which means for most of the country, largely fine and dry conditions, plenty of sunny spells around. You might just see a build of high cloud in the northwest with a weather front down out into the Atlantic. And that high pressure does hold on, which means plenty of fine and settled weather for the beginning of next week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is your chance. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's have a look at this story in the Telegraph, Charlie. This is about Anglican Church, the Church of England, dropping the word church in favour of something a bit more modern sounding. Words such as community. Why are we afraid of the word church?
Well, that's my question. I mean, you've got to assume that they think it solves some kind of problem. But I think, there are a lot of people who feel very strongly about their particular religious institution, whatever they all have different names, don't they? And if you rename one, do you have to rename all of them? Can we no longer use an individual name for different religions' community buildings?
Are you religious?
I'm spiritual.
You sound like him. Yeah.
No, certainly.
Oh, don't get Ellie started on me.
Do I believe in a God? Yes. Do I believe in any of the particular gods that are offered to us? Still undecided.
I'm like you. I said exactly that.
You two are the same. You two are exactly.
What about you, Anas? Are you particularly religious?
Well, I'm not proper religious. I won't name myself as a religious, but I really do respect religions. And we have bigger problems to think about.
Is it a sign of where we're at in this secular society?
Yes.
We're moving more and more towards that. The Anglican Church feels that the only way to be relevant is to take away any reference to church going, to being religious.
I think if the substance of what you're offering is good, it doesn't matter what it's called. So if people are going to find solace and peace and a place that makes them feel better, they're not going to care too much about what it's called. So I think relabeling it, rebranding it, I don't know, maybe it'll help, maybe it won't, but it's going to certainly upset a lot of people, I should think.
And people whose religion is important to them and kind of central to their lives, you can imagine.
Absolutely.
There's a reason Justin Welby is nicknamed by some quarters the Archbishop of Woke. Maybe this adds fuel to the fire, who knows?
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Saturday night, and this is the Saturday 5. I'm Darren Grimes, along with Dr. Renee, Will Kingston, Eunice Adjiani and Matthew Sadlin. Plenty more to come tonight, including our big interview over whether the Labour Party, Labour government I should say, are hiding the immense costs of mass migration, and the Saturday scrap between Will and Matthew on whether Nigel Farage should be banned from presenting his show on this very channel. Don't say we don't push it to the edge. It's 7 p.m. and this is the Saturday 5. That's what I say. Still to come in tonight. That question, getting your responses actually. Is Labour hiding the immense costs of mass migration? That's next, and we'll be answering your questions in Ask the Five. Do send them through to gbnews.com/your say. First of all, though, it's your Saturday night news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Darren, thank you. The top stories. A man allegedly sexually assaulted a woman on the same day he was released from prison under the government's early release scheme. It's understood he was released as part of the policy which aims to ease prison overcrowding on its first day on Tuesday. He allegedly reoffended in Sittingbourne in Kent and was later arrested at an address in South London. He appeared at a magistrate's court on Thursday charged with sexual assault, and he's due to appear at the Crown Court next month. The Prime Minister met with US President Joe Biden last night to discuss strategy and tactics regarding Ukraine and the Middle East. Meeting at the White House in Washington, D.C., the pair sat down for talks that Sir Keir Starmer described as long and productive. Speaking afterwards, the Prime Minister also said that he and the US President had reached a strong position regarding ending the conflict in Ukraine.
We've stood with Ukraine. Ukraine has a right to self-defence, and we've stood united, not just with our allies here in the US, but across with our NATO allies. That's very, very important to us. But today was about having the chance to talk not just about a particular step or tactic, but the strategy in relation to Ukraine. But also we covered the Middle East in some extensive detail, and other areas across the world. So it was a really important occasion for us to have this chance to discuss with our allies.
More questions have been asked about the government's decision to cut winter fuel payments following a vote earlier this week. Figures released by the Department for Work and Pensions estimated almost 800,000 pensioners will miss out on the benefit under the new plans. Of those set to lose the support, around two-thirds have a disability and 83% are aged 80 or over. Downing Street says a full impact assessment of the change hasn't yet taken place. A rebellion could be brewing within the Labour Party following recent comments by the Prime Minister around a ban on smoking outdoors at pubs. Labour MP for Newcastle upon Tyne East and Wallsend, Mary Glindon, has tabled a motion in Parliament against her own party in order to try and block the potential plans. In the motion, she praised the indoor smoking ban of 2007, but said extending the ban outdoors could restrict individual liberty. And today has been the first day of the Lib Dem Party conference in Brighton, with the cost of living, defence and veterans, climate change and, crucially, their plan to fix the NHS are just some of the topics that have been on the agenda today. Earlier this afternoon, party leader Sir Ed Davey arrived at the conference on a jet ski. Now, he's scheduled to speak at the event tomorrow, where a celebration is anticipated after his party won 72 seats in July's general election. That's their best result ever. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. I'll be back in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thanks, Tatiana. It's Saturday night, my friends, and you're with the Saturday Five. I'm Darren Grimes, and I can promise that you're in for another very lively hour. We're going to crack on with tonight's big interview. Now, the Conservative MP, Neil O'Brien, wrote a piece for The Telegraph questioning how transparent this government is over the cost of mass migration. He raised questions over how many of the people in our jails entered the country illegally. Are people from some countries more likely to get arrested in Britain than others? And how much do they pay in tax? Do you have a right to know all of that? These are the questions we want answered. So to discuss this, I'm pleased to welcome the Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control, Robert Bates. Robert, did you agree with the piece generally on what that Neil O'Brien, the Conservative MP, actually said? Do you think this Labour government is deliberately obtuse, shall we say, on the issue of migration? I mean, it wasn't too long ago that they said on day one they would prioritise the hiring of someone to lead up their border command control, and actually, well, that ain't happened yet, has it?
Yeah, so I thought the piece by Neil O'Brien was hitting the nail on the head. I think he outlined really the absolute data desert that we're currently dealing with when it comes to trying to explore the huge costs that mass migration is imposing on Britain, not just on our economy, but also on our society and our communities as well. The Centre for Migration Control has put a piece out today where we've tried to cobble together and ascertain exactly how many foreign national arrests have taken place in the last 12 months. And it's a hard slog to actually get your hands on this data. And that is ultimately something that's going to become increasingly difficult under the Labour Party, because let's face it, the political establishment for far too long in this country haven't been prepared to mark their own homework when it comes to how much damage they are actually inflicting by letting in over 1 million people each year. And I think the British public are increasingly sick of being lied to on this subject, and without the data they're left ultimately having to trust politicians, and I think that's a fool's errand to have to trust politicians at this point.
Well, 2 points from that then, Robert. The first point would be, well, the Conservatives weren't exactly much better than the Labour government, were they? And second point would be, do you think this is all deliberate, right? Is there a deliberate obfuscation of the facts and the truth around these issues because of, I don't know, they'll say inflaming tensions or whatever else?
Well, you're absolutely right that the Conservative Party were next to useless as well. I don't think they can really purport to have ever really, in the last 10 years, ever really been a hard line on the immigration issue. I think it's not really a kind of conspiracy. I think it's probably more likely to be the result of a kind of establishment assumption that the mass migration experiment will be bringing these inevitable economic benefits. And if you look at the kind of organisations that politicians too often defer to, such as the OBR and the Migration Advisory Committee, they're repeatedly told that this is what the country needs. We do need more people coming into the country. So I think it's more of a sense of complacency and a sense that we don't need to mark our own homework on this because we know we've got the answers right. We're seeing in other countries across Europe, Norway and Sweden and Denmark, who are actually now trying to finally get to grip with the data and the costs that do come with mass migration. And it's greatly enlivened the debate, and they've actually been able to, start conducting some public policy discussions that are moving their countries in the right direction. We don't have the same luxury here at the moment, unfortunately.
Rob, just before I throw it out to the panel, the Office for Budget Responsibility, which the Labour government is going to enshrine in law, has the final, sign-off of the budget and whatever else to avoid a Liz Truss disaster, as they put it. Do you actually think that the OBR forecasts, which forecast between 300 and 400,000 people coming here net every single year as the new normal, do you actually think that that will be used as an argument to produce net, economic growth, despite the fact that the ONS figures actually said that the least well-paid migrants they aren't contributors to the British economy. In fact, they take out more than they put in.
So the OBR has never been able to correctly forecast how many people will be coming into the country. And they've also repeatedly made huge assumptions about the economic value that migrants do bring, often assuming that those coming in are earning above the average British salary. And the report that they put out earlier this week clearly shows an attempt for them to recalibrate the way they approach this issue, showing that low-skilled migrants are a net cost on the country over the whole course of their lifetime, 150,000 before they even reach pension age. But the OBR still has a lot to do. I mean, it doesn't really calibrate the fact that 70% of those that come into the country as working migrants are actually earning less than is needed to make a fiscal benefit of a contribution to the Treasury. So the OBR moves somewhat in the right direction, but it couldn't really be considered to hit the nail on the head just yet.
Yeah, Will?
Yeah. The only thing that's surprising about this to me is how unsurprising it is. I remember reading this sort of data in Douglas Murray's Strange Death of Europe about a decade ago. Obviously, there is a disconnect between the facts and then policy outcomes. How do we actually start to bridge that gap and actually start to see some real tangible solutions in the political realm?
Well, a start would be to reverse some of the changes that the Conservative government did do to our data collection. We now don't know how much in tax is actually paid by migrants. We don't actually know how much they're claiming in benefits. We can make assumptions and best guesses, and we saw that a couple of weeks ago it came out that there's 1.69 million migrants that are unemployed or economically inactive. So we have kind of shadows on the wall, but without a wholesale reform of the way we treat this data, then it's very, very difficult to see how the conversation does move forward.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, so
Matthew.
so basically I feel like this whole mass migration experiment has failed, especially in the UK and Western Europe. And yeah, you might have higher GDP, but actually your GDP per capita is getting lower and lower because we have, you know, mass migration and they get employed for suboptimal salary levels and they drive down the salary. So GDP per capita is actually decreasing and not increasing, even though there is an increase in GDP. Well, there's more people. That's why there's an increase in GDP. And as Will said, you know, when Douglas Murray speaks about the strange death of Europe and the attack on the West, I feel like mass migration is the sole cause of that.
I mean, look, heaven help us if we didn't have migration. I mean, who's going to wipe Darren's bottom in his old age? It's a serious point. We desperately need migrants to this country because without them, just for example, our social care system would be in even bigger trouble than it is at the moment. Our NHS would be in even bigger trouble than it is at the moment. I don't think what you've mentioned there is this report out this week said that net contributor-wise, the average migrant worker puts in more to the economy overall, net, than the average UK worker. And that is an extraordinary statistic. And it doesn't surprise me. When we have guests of the calibre of Will and you on the show, it doesn't surprise me because immigration is in many ways an essential to our country.
Right, let's hear what Rob says. Hang on, let's hear what Rob says.
You committed an act of great folly there. The OBR report doesn't actually say that the average migrant is making a net contribution. They said that those migrants, they're earning the average wage of the British population are making a net contribution. And as I said earlier, there are a tiny proportion of those that are currently coming into the country. The report that you've cited, the OBR report there, doesn't actually make the claim that you've just suggested.
So hang on, who's going to wipe my bottom, as Matthew so elegantly put it?
Well, we've got 9 million economically inactive people in this country already. I don't think by bringing in more people, a lot of whom we are now seeing as well aren't actually going into work. I mean, people do come in on the health and social care visa, maybe work in the sector for a few years, but then they go on to do other things. So the idea that it's a long-term solution to the health and social care crisis is to just
We've got an ageing population. We're getting older as a country. We're not having enough children, as someone on this panel has already said. And these people are not coming in here to exploit us. They're coming in here to work, to contribute to society. You may not like them for whatever reason, but they are contributing, and they are contributing in a big way.
That's right. Many of them are not. And this is the point. You make this kind of rhetorical sophistry to say, oh, migration is a good thing. Not many people are going to argue with you. The point is how many we take in, how quickly we take them in, and most important,
who should we not have taken in?
Where they are coming from.
Who should we not have taken in?
We should not take in people that are going to keep the wages of carers low. If we stop them coming in, the carers will have to be paid more so that they want to wipe Darren's bottom when he's old.
And where's that money coming from?
Oh, that will come from the efficiencies that we can make.
Hang on, let's hear Rob. Let's hear Rob.
These huge care companies that are hiring young people and simply shirking their obligations to the young British population by paying themselves huge dividends each year. I think a better solution would be to get people into work, to get British people into the health and care sector, would be to start properly investing in them and encouraging those companies to actually invest in them rather than just paying themselves out millions, if not billions, each year.
So raising wages, paying nurses more, paying doctors more, I'm all for that, I've got to tell you.
It's not what nurses and doctors that will wipe Darren's bottom, it's carers.
Yeah, indeed, carers, absolutely. Pay them more.
Yes.
I mean, my family have relied, when my dad was dying, on end-of-life care. And every single person, there were about 30 people involved in it, to this day, who I'm grateful to. Every single one of those people, like these two guys, was not born in this country. We need them.
Yeah, exactly. I'm an immigrant myself, so I'm not saying I'm against immigrants. But then the question is, how many immigrants? If you're going to take millions of people every single year, that's not sustainable.
But the government's not contribute to
the government's not.
That data suggests there are a lot of people that are not.
The government's not. There are a lot of Brits who are not, as we've also suggested. So let's not blame immigrants. Let's get Brits working. Let's get them into work if we can.
That's what Rob's saying. We've got 9 million inactive.
And that's what Starmer's trying to do.
Rob, can I ask a question on this? Do you feel that the change of government is going to make it more likely that we, A, get the information and, B, are able to discuss it, or less likely?
Well, I don't think the current government could make the situation much worse when it comes to the data. I think ultimately we are at the moment having to really scrabble around with very meagre offerings. I think with their approach to immigration, obviously they did promise in the manifesto that they would bring net migration down. They've inherited a situation from the Conservative government where the numbers are dropping somewhat, but I don't think for a second that they have any intention to reverse the 30 years that we've seen of mass migration, with net migration running at hundreds of thousands. And just to go back to a point we were discussing previously, only 15% of those that came into the country over the last 2 years have actually come in for work reasons. A predominant number of them have come in as family members, dependents, and to study. So this fallacy that's perpetuated that every single migrant is coming in, filling a role that is otherwise going to go unfilled and is making a huge economic contribution just does not stack up.
Rob, you picked me up on something. Let me just quickly say, you picked me up on something earlier. I'm looking at the graph now. The average wage migrant worker contributes more net than the representative UK resident. That tells us something, doesn't it?
The average wage?
Yes.
It's not the average migrant worker.
It's the average wage, yes.
Right.
Yeah, a migrant earning the average wage.
Yeah.
So migrants contribute an enormous amount to our country. You'd agree with that, Rob?
Well, you can just keep saying that, Matthew, but the statistics we're trying to talk about here are showing that 70% of those that came into the country last year are earning less than they need to make a positive economic contribution.
All right, Rob, thank you very much for your time and for the panel being able to contribute there as well. Robert Bates, the Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control. Check them out. Right, folks, we're going to take a quick break now, but after the break, ding dong, gloves on, because we're going to have the Saturday Scrap. Find out what that's about with Will and Matthew going head to head.
Gloves off.
Yeah. Right, you're with the Saturday 5 live on GB News.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Did you know several Paralympic GB track and field athletes are aiming to go for gold this summer in Paris? So aside from pure talent, a British firm has incorporated, get this, space technology in the materials of running clothes to help athletes perform at their ultimate capacity. I'm not sure if I believe this, but we'll find out in a sec. Trailblazing scientists, engineers and designers at British firm Rheon Labs have taken an idea first used in a NASA project, and they've now developed it for over 15 years at Imperial College in London.
First of all, please can you explain to us a bit more about how and what this incredible technology is?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, our founder, Dr. Dan Plant, spent many years developing these kind of dynamic materials. That means they behave in what's called non-Newtonic way. So they don't follow the rules. Effectively, they can change their behavior depending on kind of stress or stretch you apply to it. So what you get on an athlete level, if you imagine you have a garment, it's supercharged. It's such that the garment changes its support depending on your movement or your activity or the speed at which you run.
So you're saying that it generates, what, more sort of kinetic energy, is that right?
Not quite. It makes you effectively make more out of your own energy. Spot the athletes with the wavy curves and stripes, you'll see that. So that's super polymer we have in combination with these stripes that are kind of built around the way your muscles moves.
You said the difference between first and fourth place is a fraction of a percent.
Yeah, that's the main difference it makes. So even if you manage to kind of make more of your own energy and improve your performance by 1%, that's the difference between podium and non-podium.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan.
GB News royalty with
Your perfect start to the weekend.
lucky us.
Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions.
That raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return.
And a few surprises along the way.
Might be cold in this studio.
That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Saturday Five. As always, thank you very much for your messages about tonight's topics. Earlier in the last hour, we were discussing the coal mine and the net zero ban on said coal mine at the High Court. Claudette said so much for, the transparency around net zero as well. I mean, it's pretty obvious, right, that this is a blanket ban on anything that produces energy that isn't a wind turbine or a solar panel. Jaman says it's ridiculous. We have the opportunity to mine for coal that can give employment. We need to be using our own natural resources. And on the NHS point that we discussed earlier, John says the NHS does not need more money. It needs culling of the made-up jobs. Management, diversity managers, woke ideology, illegal immigrants using the NHS, rectifying treatment for those who go abroad for cheap vanity procedures that go wrong. The list could go on and on. Well, John, I'm pleased to tell you that Dr. Renee has now made you the Chief Director of the National Health Service in England. So congratulations, John. Now, we're going to get on to something quite exciting. It's time. Indeed, it's time for tonight's main event. Now, a parliamentary committee has set out a memorandum outlining key aims to what they say is driving up standards in Parliament and to improve the culture and working practices and reform, for want of a better word, the Chamber's proceedings. But this could mean our very own Nigel Farage could be banned from his presenting gig here at GB News and, of course, Lee Anderson. So should Nigel Farage be banned from presenting because he's an MP? Well, Will Kingston and Matthew Stadlen are going to have this out and debate this. So ding, ding, folks. Seconds out. It's round one. Will, we'll let you take it away.
My argument is very simple, and it is not just because Nigel is wonderfully entertaining Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, 7 p.m. on GB News. Check it out. Got the plug in. It is because more communication from politicians is fundamentally a good thing. That means more accountability towards politicians is a good thing, but also more direct communication in the way that Nigel communicates is a good thing. We know that much of the mainstream media has an agenda. We know that they warp facts. We know that they have political objectives which they seek to distort what politicians say for their own ends. By giving Farage the ability to speak directly to the people, you know what his priorities are, you know what his policies are, you get to hold him to account in a more adequate way. We need to encourage more politicians to do this, not less.
I know Nigel personally a little bit because we're both presenters on LBC at the same time. I was always interested to talk to him. He was interested to talk to me because I'm someone who believes in understanding what those you very strongly disagree with think. I also think that he is a very effective actually broadcaster. I thought he was very good on the radio in many ways. I thought he was a very effective communicator on GB News. I'd happily go on his show and tackle him on his views. However, it's a very important principle of democracy, the separation of powers. So the separation, for example, of our legislative body from our judicial system. And it is also important to keep separate the so-called fourth estate, to not blur the lines between our politics, between our politicians and our journalism and our journalists. And I've been on, not Nigel's show, but I've been on Jacob Rees-Mogg's show, I've been on Lee Anderson's show, and I'm happy to do so while they exist because I think they need to be challenged and I think I can effectively challenge them. However, it is absurd that they are interviewing me rather than me or some other journalist interviewing them. They have a degree of power. They are elected representatives. The way to hold them to account is to get them on shows being interviewed, not having them interview others.
Well, number one, the separation of powers is a completely different concept and doesn't include the media. But the second point,
it's an analogy.
In that whole point there, I didn't hear a single harm of this, of what as a result of Nigel Farage hosting a show. I heard kind of some vague principles. I actually didn't hear what is actually wrong. What is the harm with doing this? It's very obvious what the benefits are. It's very obvious the idea of direct accountability. I can't see any real harm of this proposal.
In what way is he directly accountable? By having the power of his own show where he gets to interview other people. And by the way, this doesn't just go...
Answer Will's question.
I will answer the question because it blurs the line between journalism and politics. Journalists should be holding power and our elected representatives to account, not the other way round. And I would just say this as well. It doesn't, to my mind, extend just to reform UK MPs. Obviously not. David Lammy Lamy, someone I considered a friend of mine, someone I was also a presenter with or before on LBC. I don't believe he should have had his own radio show. So it absolutely has to be fair across the board.
Blurring the lines, again, is not a harm. And again, if you want to talk about blurring
Why
the
don't you
lines,
think it's a harm?
Journalists have been blurring the lines with politics now for the last 20 to 30 years. I think the whole idea that we have these separate estates between media and politics is a furphy.
What?
But I just don't, again, I don't see where the problem is here. I really, really don't.
All right, well, take it out to the panel now. You let us know at home who you thought won that one. Renee?
Matthew, would you extend this to newspaper columns?
Arguably, but our newspapers operate in a different way in this country because they aren't regulated in the same way and to the same extent that our television and radio industries are. So, for example, a newspaper like The Times or The Guardian, whatever your choice of politics is, they're fully entitled to be political. TV stations are not supposed to be political, whether that's the BBC, Sky News, GB News or whatever else. GB News is definitely blurring those lines, but so far Ofcom has said go ahead.
TV stations are not meant to be political. I thought only the BBC
It's just
was... I thought only the BBC was not meant to be
that's
political.
a misunderstanding of the rules. ITV are bound by the same rules as is GB News.
so
Although
is
in the
Channel
case of
4
GB News, it's a bit blurred because there's a question as to whether it's a news channel or not.
So is Channel 4 News.
Indeed.
And Michael Crick, who sometimes comes on this channel, who was, as you well know, involved with Channel 4 News for many years, before that the BBC, he says himself that in the later years of his career at Channel 4, that they were incredibly biased, especially during Brexit and all these other
And I'll answer that very quickly. I think to some extent that's a fair point, and you've represented what Michael has to say. He's entitled to that view. My instinct would be, but I didn't watch a huge amount of Channel 4 News, that it was probably gently left-leaning. Hugely biased, I don't think that's fair.
What about
but the point I'm making is this has to be rigorously fair. This isn't just about Farage or Lee Anderson. It's also about David Lammy. I mean, why should Angela Rayner, for example, the Deputy Prime Minister, I don't know whether she would be given an opportunity on LBC, I think she has in the past, why should she be given a radio show, even as a stand-in? She's a Deputy Prime Minister. We should be holding her to account, not giving her that power.
But you hold her to account by
voting.
You hold her to account by voting, but also you hold her to account by listening to her each week. Can I make one broader point? And that is politics has been so dumbed down. Politics and policy ideas are not discussed in the way they once were. We should celebrate politicians getting out in public and having discussions, having debates, having conversations, and not hiding away.
I think you're mixing two things there.
Let's let Eunice come in.
I just think more exposure by politicians is a good thing, not a bad thing. The more we know what a politician thinks, the more we get them exposed.
Sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Exactly, and I think there's no harm having politicians having their own program because they will expose themselves over time, whether they're being interviewed
Hopefully
or whether
not
they're...
literally.
And I don't think it's a bad thing. And I was reading about this other thing that, Nigel Farage earns so much money from GB News. I guess what's the problem with that? I don't have any problem with politicians being rich. And as a matter of fact, I feel like career politicians that hide or actually end up being more corrupt than the ones that expose themselves. I think it's a good thing to have more exposure for politicians.
While the law is that Nigel Farage can have his own television show, not only do I have no interest in how much he earns, but good luck to him if he earns a lot of money. That's fine. I'm saying that it is an absurd position where someone like me would go on Nigel's show and be interviewed by someone who is an MP. It should be the other way. It should be. I can, and that's why I do it. But it should be the other way around.
OK, so Matthew, let me ask you this very simple question then. You appear on Nigel's show, right? Mm-hmm. Nigel is only ever...
Well, I haven't actually been asked on his show, but I would go on it if I were asked. You would go on it, fine.
Well, when you appear on this channel, then, in particular, and everyone that I've seen on Nigel's show, there are left-leaning people on every night he's on air. He always hears them out. He always hears their side of the argument. He never offers a party line or anything like that. He is a professional.
He doesn't offer a party line. You don't think that his monologues are in sync with his party, which he leads, which is a UK party representing 4 million people?
Well, you could argue that about Carol Vorderman offering an opinion every 2 seconds.
She's not an MP.
To do that? No,
she's not an MP. There are wider questions to ask as to whether the business model of LBC, where I worked for 4 years, and GB News, whether the business models are appropriate or not. I happen to think that GB News has a very effective and successful formula. I also think that LBC has the same. It's a different one. And I think there may well be a space for it. Certainly while it exists, I will come on a right-wing channel, because I think you would call it a right-wing channel, and I would try to hold those on it. I would try to hold, well, there's only one left-leaning person on this panel, and I would continue to come on it to challenge, yes, you have, and that's why I come on it, to challenge ideas and to hold to account. I just don't think it's right for politicians to be trying to hold journalists to account. It should be the other way around.
Okie dokie, we'll leave that one there. Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Will. Now, coming up next, we've got the Bunch of Five, where we'll discuss things from Reform UK being the real opposition party, that's not from Nigel Farage but Eunice, and a sexed-up Prue Leith. Didn't think I'd be reading that one out anytime soon. You're with the Saturday 5 live on GB News.
Hello, good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, we've got a bit of a mix in the weather for this weekend. Sunny spells, blustery showers, also some cloud and some outbreaks of rain, but lots of fine weather around too. And the reason for this mix is that we've got high pressure to the south giving us those fine conditions, but we've also got a weather front that's slowly sinking its way southeastwards across the country, bringing us that cloud and rain. Now, as we head into this evening, that cloud and rain will slowly move its way into northern areas. And behind it, we've got plenty of blustery showers moving their way into western parts of Scotland. But to the far south, that's where it's going to be clear and dry and feeling quite chilly as soon as the sun goes down tonight. May even see a little bit of grass frost in rural spots down to the south. So to start Sunday then, as I say, plenty of showers moving their way into western and northern parts of Scotland, across Northern Ireland and just into the Scottish borders. A fairly cloudy start that will break up as we head through the day. Cloud and outbreaks of rain and drizzle, which could be a touch heavy over hills across northern areas of England and Wales. But as I say, across the south after a chilly night, that is going to make it feel cold on Sunday to begin with. Through the day, though, things are going to warm up. Where we have this band of cloud, rain and drizzle, that may just linger on for a time, so quite a damp day for some northern areas of England and Wales. Sunny spells and blustery showers through into Scotland. Some of these could be heavy with some hail and thunder. But once again, down to the south and southeast, that's where they'll hold on to the warmer weather and largely dry as well. Now, for the start of the new week, we'll start to see high pressure taking hold, which means for most of the country, largely fine and dry conditions, plenty of sunny spells around. You might just see a build of high cloud in the northwest with a weather front down out into the Atlantic. And that high pressure does hold on, which means plenty of fine and settled weather for the beginning of next week.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Saturday 5. As always, thank you very much for your emails about tonight's topics. Where Toby says, where in the UK can actually people who are minded to watch a channel like GB News tune in and hear those views anywhere else? You know, that's a fair point, I think. You know, the plurality within the media, choice within the media, I think is a good thing, and actually that's what the regulator is supposed to...
Well, Nigel Farage has been on Question Time an extraordinary number of times for someone who hasn't until the last 2 months actually been an MP.
Because he's the only right-wing person that they'll have on with a panel of 4 other people. Or is it 3 of them?
Sorry, you're saying the Conservative Party is not right-wing. My point is
No,
that Nigel
Farage,
Farage, who I think it sort of is the figurehead in many ways for GB News, has many times been on the BBC.
Well, Sheila says, I think it's a good thing for MPs to be on TV. Not all journalists represent the people and they need to be held to account. And then Sally says, I think Matthew should be banned instead from GB News. Now, though, it's time for this. All right. Will, it's Will first.
Okay. I told you, yes.
After all that.
All right, should I start?
No, it's Will. Order!
That great political scientist, Taylor Swift, has entered the American presidential campaign. She has thrown her support wholeheartedly behind Kamala Harris. The left don't learn, do they? This will backfire on the left. Everyday people are sick and tired of woke celebrities telling them what to do and how to think. If this moves the needle at all, it will be a net vote winner for Donald Trump.
If it moves the dial at all, I mean, are people really going to take their political advice from Taylor Swift? Sadly, I think they probably will.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because we have Kamala Harris, I don't think has enough charisma. She always gets like other celebrities to endorse her.
Doesn't she have the brat?
No, yeah, and then she always also has Megan Thee Stallion that comes on stage and starts twerking before her shows, and I find that extremely cheap. And I feel like Donald Trump is fighting the system,
right?
Unfortunately,
we're apparently messing up the order tonight, so I'm going to get confused naturally. But Eunice, it's you next.
Am I not allowed to come back on this Trump issue?
This is a fire round, Matthew.
Well, just in 2 sentences, I very much hope that Taylor Swift does not have an influence on the US election, but I'd also remind people that literally one of the candidates is a billionaire celebrity who is running to be president.
It's one individual.
And if there's been one lesson of the populist revolts of the last decade, they are uniquely capable of understanding common people.
OK.
Who, billionaires? Billionaire celebrities?
Hang on, we've got to let other people in. Quick.
Yes. OK, so is the Reform Party the official opposition to Labour? Because we only have people like Nigel Farage and Richard Tice asking the tough questions in House of Commons, and we almost feels like Rishi Sunak is always on holiday or is asking soft questions. And as always said this, I don't think the Conservative Party is conservative anymore. They're either centrist or centre-left. And we have the Uni Party now, and Reform is the only opposition, and you can see that by the questions that Reform MPs ask, such as two-tier policing. So, Darren, what do you think?
Yes, I think actually they have been pretty good in Parliament, and I do think the Conservative Party has been nowhere to be seen. Yeah. You know, when it was in the press that all the cronyism of Labour appointments within the civil service had come out through those who had made donations to the party, the Tories didn't comment on it. I saw no comment from the Conservative Party on that. Yeah. Where is the accountability for this government holding their feet to the fire, the opposition? And I think if 5 MPs are doing the best job, because, as Matthew said earlier to me, the Lib Dems are to the left of the Labour Party right now.
What I would say is that, certainly if you look at social media, Reform UK are shouting the loudest. I mean, they are dominating that sphere, as far as I can see, at least on Twitter or on X, compared to the Conservatives who are embroiled in this disastrous leadership election, which is going to get them nowhere. But the idea that Robert Jenrick, who is too extreme for Rishi Sunak's policies, the idea that he's centre-left, or even Tom Tugendhat, who is supposed to be the sort of left candidate within the Tory party for the leadership, who wants to drag us out of the ECHR, the idea that he's centre-left, I mean, I'm almost lost for words.
But you've summed it up, really. This is the problem, that everything has been dragged so far to the left now that everything else looks far right.
Yeah, anywhere to the right of Jeremy Corbyn makes you far right.
Just call a duck. If it quacks like a duck, if it looks like a duck, it's far right.
Well, I would, Matthew, but if I did, I don't think Ofcom would be too pleased. Right, I've got Prince George, His Royal Highness, and he has been learning to fly this week. He's 11, and he's been up in the air, taken after his father and his father before him. And actually, I think this is a lesson for Britain and for parents out there, right? He is, of course, a royal, but maybe we can't all afford to teach an 11-year-old to fly and all the rest of it. But what we can do is actually allow young people to take risks, to learn things. I think there's far too much in society today, a wrapping in cotton wool that is making a generation of kids who are too scared to pick up the telephone. I'm not joking, Poland says that. Scared to pick up the telephone, scared to interact with people, and that's going to really hold them back. So I say, more power to you, and actually we all ought to take a leaf out of the Royals book.
100%. I mean, I see this in my day-to-day work. I see teenagers that are scared of their own shadow now because mum is always helicoptered in and sorted out their problems for them. We need to let our children take risks so that they can modify their actions. And when they go into the big wide world, when they face, you know, even someone telling them that they can't be late for work, they don't crumble and cry.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, the Royals have put also an example out there on the other side of the spectrum where Mike Tyndall and Dara Phillips have slapped an AirTag on their kid to make sure that they can be monitored at all times. So I think the Royals aren't...
Guys, as a young parent, I'm not young, but my son is young. I really think it's a balance. You saw at one extreme with Grenfell Tower, if you don't have health and safety, if it's not implemented properly, 72 people can lose their lives. On the other hand, of course, we want our children away from their phones, running around, chucking balls around, like my little boy does. Yesterday, he hurt his nose because he tripped on the steps because I wasn't exactly behind him at that moment. But you've got to give children a little bit of freedom.
And he won't trip on that step next time. I don't know how you can bring Grenfell into it. We're not talking about health and safety. We're about parents allowing their children to walk along a wall without having a heart attack.
Yeah, and I just think overprotecting people will actually damage them long term. It's like the devouring mother complex. The more you try to protect your children, the more anxious they actually become. So,
all right, Renee?
So, look, I'm really torn over this because I think women should be able to wear whatever they want at any age. You know, I've talked about women of my age wearing a bikini and so forth. However, when I saw today the headline that Prue Leith had been sexed up, here it is, guys. I was left feeling that bondage should stay in the bedroom.
Who was it for?
London Fashion Week.
Who? Do you know who the designer
was? No, but I just...
And it wasn't for charity or something?
I don't know.
But when you say should, I mean, look, that's not to my taste, that particular look. But, I mean, who am I to tell Prue Leith how to dress?
I know, sadly, we couldn't get the picture, but there was a picture of Jilly Cooper today, who's actually older than Prue, who has also been sexed up, and she was wearing the most beautiful suit. She looked absolutely sexy and stunning. And I thought, OK, Prue, that should be in the bedroom, and Jilly's got it right.
It may not be the smartest move from me to comment on women's fashion on national television, but here we are. It's just not a good dress. It's just a rubbish dress, I'm sorry.
She looks like she's been strung up.
But I think she's fantastic, isn't she?
I do too.
Prue Leith.
Oh, yeah, I do. And her son is Danny Kruger MP, who is a good MP, I think. Anyway, Matthew, what have you got?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
You learn new facts on GB News. Now, my story is a story which involves a council that I think has banned, moving forward, any non-vegan food being eaten in meetings. Now, I do think that is pushing things a little bit far. However, as a far too heavy meat eater myself, I was twice for 2 9-month periods as a boy through conscience of vegetarian, but as a heavy meat eater myself, I do think that I and most of us should be cutting back on our meat because I think for environmental reasons, but I also think, of course, for animal welfare reasons.
Right, so first of all, there is no such thing as a far too heavy meat eater, as long as the meat that you eat is good quality, pasture-fed, fresh meat, not processed.
But not everyone can afford that.
What's killing us is processed meat. That's the problem.
I wasn't so much talking about the diet. I was talking about animal welfare and, of course, emissions.
If you want to cut down on your meat eating, then you can choose to cut down your meat eating. Why does someone have to ban you from doing it? This instinct on the left in this country to ban things they don't like has to stop. It has to stop.
It's a bit extreme, but it's also
actually is very, very climate
intensive. It isn't. If someone actually eats, you know, home-cooked fresh vegetables and things that's vegan, that's fine. That's good and healthy. And Matthew's right. Plant-based diets are,
but
you know, good.
Falafel,
all of the prepared stuff is worse for you even than...
I'm not sure about this whole thing about the left wanting to ban things, but I do think this particular policy is a little extreme. However, it is getting us talking, which is why I chose it. And I'm not preaching, because I've said that I am a heavy meat eater, but surely for animal welfare, I do try to get well-sourced meat.
That's our decision, not for my employer to tell me what I must eat.
Exactly, and I also think meat is essential in a healthy, balanced diet. There's certain things in meat meat that you cannot get from vegetables. And always when I look at vegans, they just don't look healthy to me.
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I look at a lot of meat eaters and they look large.
OK. Still ahead, my friends. We answer all of your questions in Ask the Five. No topics are off limits. What hell have you unleashed upon us this week? You're with the Saturday Five, live on GB News.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Sunday nights on GB News. From 6, Neil Oliver. At 7, it's Free Speech Nation with Andrew Doyle. At 9, Mark Dolan. And at 11, get set for the week ahead with headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
But let's get stuck in. Prince Harry, he's consulted former aides about a possible partial return to the UK as he seeks to repair his public image, that is according to the Daily Mail.
Who wants him? I'm sorry. This is, of course, he's got his book Spare. The paperback comes out later this year. Now, he's not updating it, but he'll want to promote it.
Yeah, absolutely.
He says he's not doing any interviews, but we're talking about him now, we're talking about Spare.
Yeah.
And is he going to come back with his wife? What about the children? Because apparently it's not safe for his wife and children in this country, according to Harry, even though he took his wife to Colombia, which is much less safe than Britain, in my view.
It's absurd. Anyway, he was able to attend his uncle's funeral quite easily.
He did.
Nobody knew he was coming. He said he wasn't, and then he did. And he was perfectly safe.
And he would have had the same security as every other member of the royal family who attended that event.
Yeah.
But, of course, he didn't speak to his brother at the funeral.
No, he wouldn't, would he?
So if he's trying to fix it, honestly, a funeral is where you should put all differences aside because it's not about you, it's about respect to the person, the family of the person who's gone, which was his uncle. It was his... Diana's sister's husband had died. So, yet they didn't speak. They didn't speak in the church, they didn't speak when they left the church. Incredible, isn't it?
It's awful because that moment is when you realise that we are all mortal. And at that point, all other things should transcend that, but not...
Well, this move is being branded as Operation Bring Harry In From the Cold, because apparently he's a bit fed up with his life in Montecito. Does that mean with his wife?
I don't know.
Oh, no. Apparently he's dissatisfied with advice from his American-based image expert.
Well, they've had about 10 of them, haven't they? They're on to their number 11.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun. No, he didn't say that, though. I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Tom Harwood. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Saturday Five. As always, thank you very much for your emails and messages about tonight's topics. Speaking of which, it's time for this. All right, you horrible lot. Let's see what you've got for us this week. Marie has written in. Marie says, I'm meeting the Greek in-laws, that's very specific, next week. They don't speak English. How should I communicate with them?
Take chocolates and flowers and smile. That's it.
Yeah, just be polite, be nice. Just wave at them.
Take them to Lamonia Restaurant in Primrose Hill.
What if they don't live in London? It's not specific.
An intricate system of hand signals and gestures.
What? You mean sign language?
Yeah, that one. I knew there was a term for it.
I could impress new Greek in-laws because I can count to 100 in Greek.
Oh.
Just don't ask.
Okay.
I think this is a trick question because if you've got Greek in-laws, it suggests you're married to a Greek. So surely you would know something of the culture
Do
of
it
Greece.
to 10.
That's very impressive.
Very good.
Is that not a Greek wine? Yeah, we have absolutely no verification on that. So,
There's someone Greek will
well, actually, Marie can ask one of the in-laws whether or not that was right. OK, next up, Archibald has said, I did a lot of overtime this month. What should I do with the money? Pay off my credit card debts or go on holiday? That's quite a good one.
Save it for your heating bill because it's going up.
Yeah, net zero.
No, go on holiday. Work up your carbon footprint.
Yeah, and get away from Starmageddon, the kind of amount of time you can spend away from this increasingly authoritarian hellscape that is Starmer's England, the better.
Matthew?
I'd pay off the credit card, I'm afraid.
Matthew.
I would go on holiday. I don't care. You only live once.
You've got to fix the roof while the sun is shining, and thankfully the sun has finally come out.
Only for a week.
I'm kind of lost for words.
All right. OK, next we have James, who asks, I've been offered a new job, but my notice period for my current job is 6 months. Wow. Should I leave early and hope they don't sue me?
Yes, I would leave. If you have a new job and it's your dream job and it's a better job, you have to leave. Like, you cannot be bound by some company you don't care about.
But you are in a contract.
You might find if you go and talk to them and say that you want to leave, they may ask you to leave and then they'll pay you the 6 months.
Oh, or, yeah.
I'm not going to give you any sort of financial advice. What I would say is, were I in your situation, I would definitely not want to get sued. Being sued is a bad thing, but how likely is it that someone's going to get sued? I guess it perhaps depends on what sort of job it is.
As an aside, I just can't understand why companies choose to have these ridiculously long notice periods, because everyone always checks out in that time. You never get value out of the employee. It always annoys the employee. I think it's something we should consider reducing.
I think on this particular question, I should hold my own water. And finally, Ellie asks, my Labour campaigning boyfriend thinks that I voted Labour in the last election. Oh, this is a good one. I changed my mind at the last minute and voted Reform.
Good. Sensible.
The guilt is killing me. Should I finally confess to him, Matthew?
Well, I'm married to a Conservative who was out canvassing on the day of the election, and on the night of the election, when the exit poll came out, was quite literally in tears. I was in an election party and I went home early because my wife was in tears because she cared that much about it. Listen, I think it's perfectly possible to have romance across political boundaries. I'm not sure that I could be married to someone who votes Reform UK, though.
I just don't know why we've become so polarised this day and age, where there's the far left and the far right, and people can't be in a relationship if one is a Labour voter and another one is a Reform voter.
Well, hang on, what would you say to a girl that said the same as Matthew's just said about I wouldn't date someone that...
Would you marry someone who voted Labour?
The thing is, as long as there's love, look, there's many different aspects to it, but I mean, it would help if you have the same temperament and you support the same political party. But whereas back in the day, you could be a Labour voter and a Conservative voter, and you can still have a long, loving marriage. I don't know why we've come to this stage.
Would you vote? Would you marry a teal?
No, I wouldn't, because Conservatives are sexier. Everyone knows that.
What's a teal?
In Australia, they are the Greens. They sort of snatch away the votes from the Liberals.
Well, my wife is very sexy and she's a Conservative, but that's purely anecdotal.
But you see, the other thing as well, Matthew, is you've just done what the left do all of the time. You've smeared anyone who's reformed and said, I could marry Reform.
It's a free speech station, it's a free speech country, and I think that someone who votes Reform, their views are too extreme for me, and I wouldn't be happy with them. However, my wife is a dyed-in-the-wool Conservative. She thinks Starmer's going to be a disaster, and I love her.
Are you sure she has Reform?
Now, hang on. I would like to shake the hand of everyone that voted Reform. You thought I was going to say something else, you dirty bugger. Now, the question I'm going to throw out there is, should MPs be banned from receiving gifts and freebies? That's from one of our viewers just now. Do you think, actually, we're talking about banning MPs on shows? Raise your hands. Does anyone think they should be banned from receiving gifts and freebies?
I think they should have to declare them. Just as a doctor, if I receive a gift, I have to declare it.
Because it's just no, you shouldn't be influenced, even though you're open about it and you declare it. Why should MPs, simply because they have been voted in by us to represent us in Parliament, why should they be given gifts? No.
Well, but why should Renee get a gift for saving someone? You know,
she's not an MP.
People might value their MP. She is a doctor, though. She's a public servant.
But as long as it's not a corrupting influence, I think you should be allowed.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
All right, we'll leave that there. Thank you very much to our guests tonight. Next up, it's the brilliant Leo Kearse with the Saturday Night Showdown. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Eunice. Thank you, Renee. And thank you, Will. We'll see... And you at home, of course, more important. Now, we'll see you again next week.
Warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening and welcome to your GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Well, we've got a bit of a mix in the weather for this weekend. Sunny spells, blustery showers, also some cloud and some outbreaks of rain, but lots of fine weather around too. And the reason for this mix is that we've got high pressure to the south giving us those fine conditions, but we've also got a weather front that's slowly sinking its way southeastwards across the country, bringing us that cloud and rain. Now, as we head into this evening, that cloud and rain will slowly move its way into northern areas. And behind it, we've got plenty of blustery showers moving their way into western parts of Scotland. But to the far south, that's where it's going to be clear and dry and feeling quite chilly as soon as the sun goes down tonight. May even see a little bit of grass frost in rural spots down to the south. So to start Sunday then, as I say, plenty of showers moving their way into western and northern parts of Scotland. Across Northern Ireland and just into the Scottish borders, a fairly cloudy start that will break up as we head through the day. Cloud and outbreaks of rain and drizzle, which could be a touch heavy over hills across northern areas of England and Wales. But as I say, across the south after a chilly night, that is going to make it feel cold on Sunday to begin with. Through the day, though, things are going to warm up. Where we have this band of cloud, rain and drizzle, that may just linger on for a time, so quite a damp day for some northern areas of England and Wales. Sunny spells and blustery showers through into Scotland. Some of these could be heavy with some hail and thunder. But once again, down to the south and southeast, that's where they'll hold on to the warmer weather and largely dry as well. Now, for the start of the new week, we'll start to see high pressure taking hold, which means for most of the country, largely fine and dry conditions, plenty of sunny spells around. You might just see a build of high cloud in the northwest with a weather front down out into the Atlantic. And that high pressure does hold on, which means plenty of fine and settled weather for the beginning of next week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be good luck.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with